The massive doors of the Galactic Military Academy slid open with a soft hiss. 3 human cadets walked in, their boots making sharp sounds against the polished floor. Other alien students moved away, some trying to hide their fear, others openly showing their disgust. The humans had earned their place here, but that didn't mean everyone was happy about it. Jack stood in the middle, tall and steady. To his left was Marcus, shorter but with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Emma walked on the right, her red hair tied back tight, face calm despite the whispers around them. They were the first humans ever picked for the Academy's elite program, and they knew many wanted them to fail. The Academy's main hall was huge, with ceilings so high it disappeared in the darkness above. Floating screens showed battles from across the galaxy, while alien instructors moved between groups of students from 100 different worlds. But when the 3 humans walked in, many of these screens flickered to show their faces. "Look at those Deathworlders," one blue-skinned instructor said to another. "They think raw strength is enough to be here." The words were meant to be heard. Jack kept his face blank, but his hands tightened just a bit. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emma just kept walking. They'd reached the center of the hall where head instructor Ralix waited. He was tall, with gray skin that seemed to shift like smoke, and 4 arms crossed over his chest. "So," he said, voice cool and flat, "these are the humans who scored so high on the entry tests." He walked around them slowly. "Impressive physical scores, yes, but this academy is about more than just muscle." "We're ready for any test, sir," Jack said. His voice was steady and respectful, but there was steel in it too. Some of the watching aliens shifted uncomfortably. Humans weren't supposed to sound so confident. Rylix stopped in front of them. "Are you?" A large screen behind him lit up, showing complex star maps and battle formations. "This is the Academy's ultimate test, a war simulation that models 10 years of galactic conflict. The current record for completion is..." He paused. 10 years of real time. Emma studied the screen, her eyes moving fast over the data. Marcus was already pulling apart the patterns in the simulation setup. Jack watched the alien students' reactions, noting who looked worried and who looked eager to see the humans fail. "No one has ever beaten it faster than real time," Rylix continued. "The simulation adapts, learns, creates complex diplomatic and military situations that mirror real galactic conflicts. It's impossible to rush through it. Strategy takes time. Planning takes patience." He looked down at the humans. "Things your species isn't known for." "We'd like to try it now," Marcus said quietly. The hall went silent. Even Ralix seemed surprised. "Now," without preparation, without studying the historical attempts. The head instructor's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. "You can't possibly think." "We're ready now," Emma confirmed. She stepped forward, eyes locked on the simulation data. "Unless you're afraid we might do better than expected." The challenge hung in the air. Rylix's skin darkened slightly. He couldn't back down now, not with hundreds of students watching. "Very well," he said finally. "Take your positions at the simulation terminals. Show us what humans can do." The words dripped with doubt. The 3 humans walked to the raised platform, where the simulation terminals waited. As they sat down, the machines adjusted to their body shapes. Screens flickered to life around them, filling their view with stars, planets, fleet movements, and resource calculations. The other students gathered around, many already betting on how quickly the humans would fail. "Simulation start in 10 seconds, the computer announced. Jack, Marcus, and Emma shared a quick look. They didn't need words. They'd trained together for months for this chance. They knew what Earth's history had taught them about war, about survival, about winning against impossible odds. Now they would show the galaxy why humans were called Deathworlders. The countdown reached 0. The simulation began, and in that moment, none of the watching aliens realized they were about to witness the impossible. The simulation's first minute passed in total silence. The watching aliens shifted uneasily as the three humans sat perfectly still, their eyes moving rapidly across the data streams. They weren't touching the controls. They weren't issuing orders. They were just reading. "What are they doing?" one student whispered. "They're wasting time." But head instructor Ralix held up one hand for silence. His shifting gray skin had darkened further as he watched the humans' vital signs on his private display. Their heart rates were steady, but their brain activity was off the charts. Emma's fingers suddenly flew across her console, pulling up deeper and deeper layers of the simulation's code. She found the physics engine, the diplomatic protocols, the resource algorithms. Her eyes narrowed. "Found it," she said softly. "The whole thing runs on standard Galactic Council protocols." Marcus was already nodding, his own screens filled with diplomatic treaties and trade regulations. "They copy-pasted the real rules," he murmured. "All of them, including the holes." A small smile touched his lips as he remembered Earth's history of finding loopholes in seemingly perfect systems. Jack studied the military components, watching how the AI civilizations positioned their fleets. "They're all following textbook patterns," he said, "like watching old chess computers, every move by the book." He thought about Earth's military history, about guerrilla warfare, about how often the unexpected beat the unbeatable. The aliens watching them grew more confused. The humans were talking about things that made no sense. The simulation was perfect. It had been refined over centuries by the greatest military minds in the galaxy. There were no holes to find. Emma's hands began moving faster. "The physics engine has a flaw," she announced. "It calculates gravity slingshots the same way the old Earth probes used them, but it never accounts for multiple bodies." Her smile grew wider. "We can make impossible moves if we time it right." Marcus was already building on that. "The diplomatic systems are too rigid," he said. "They follow rules perfectly, like artificial intelligence before humans taught it to be creative." He began setting up a cascade of small diplomatic incidents, each one perfectly legal, each one designed to create chaos. Jack leaned forward. "Their fleet formations assume everyone follows the same tactical doctrine," he said. "Earth faced that problem in every war we ever fought. The answer is always the same: do what they think is impossible." The simulation's time counter showed 5 minutes had passed in the real world. In the simulated galaxy, the first moves were about to begin. The watching aliens had no idea what they were about to see. Emma began writing new commands, her fingers a blur. She was creating flight paths that the simulation said were impossible, but she knew better. Earth's scientists had mapped gravity wells for centuries. They knew how to make the impossible possible. Marcus triggered his first diplomatic trap. 3 alien civilizations suddenly found themselves in a legal deadlock. Each one was following the rules perfectly, but together they created a paradox that froze their entire diplomatic course. The simulation struggled to process this unexpected development. Jack launched their first military strike. He split their small starting fleet into tiny groups, using Emma's gravity calculations to appear where no ships should be able to reach. The simulation's AI responded with textbook maneuvers, exactly as predicted. Their ships moved to perfect defensive positions, leaving themselves perfectly vulnerable to attacks from impossible angles. "Impossible," Rylix whispered, watching the chaos unfold. The humans weren't playing the simulation like a game. They were fighting it like a war, using every trick their species had learned on their deadly homeworld. They had turned the simulation's perfect rules against itself. The other students watched in growing shock as the human strategy unfolded. This wasn't just about winning anymore. The 3 humans were about to show the galaxy why Earth's history had made them different. Why being a Deathworlder meant more than just surviving a harsh planet. It meant learning to think in ways the galaxy had never imagined. 10 minutes into the simulation, the galaxy erupted into beautiful chaos. Emma's gravity slingshot calculations had turned their small fleet into ghosts, appearing and disappearing between star systems in ways the simulation's AI labeled impossible. The watching aliens gasped as human ships emerged from what seemed like empty space, struck vital targets, and vanished again. Marcus's diplomatic traps spread like a virus. His carefully planned cascade of minor incidents had grown into a storm of confusion. Trade routes frozen, diplomatic channels locked, alliances straining, all because every civilization was following the rules too perfectly, creating a deadlock that grew worse with each attempt to solve it. Jack's military strikes hit with surgical precision. He didn't target the biggest fleets or the strongest fortresses. Instead, he struck at supply lines, communication hubs, and small but crucial maintenance stations. The simulation's AI responded with massive fleets, only to find they couldn't catch the human smaller, faster ships that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. "Look at their resource management," one alien instructor whispered to another. The humans weren't building huge fleets or stockpiling traditional materials. They were targeting very specific resources, choosing quality over quantity. Their ships were small but perfectly equipped, each one carrying exactly what it needed for its mission, and nothing more. Emma's next move shocked everyone. She used a complex series of gravity assists to slingshot a single drone through 7 different star systems in less than a minute of simulation time. The drone dropped tiny quantum observers in each system, giving their fleet eyes everywhere. The simulation's AI tried to track the drone's path, but kept reporting that such movement was mathematically impossible. Marcus triggered the next phase of his plan. As the major civilizations struggled with his diplomatic gridlock, he approached the smaller, neutral systems. He offered them simple, clear agreements while their bigger neighbors were paralyzed. One by one, these smaller powers joined the human side, not out of fear, but because the humans were the only ones still able to trade effectively. Jack's fleet had grown, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of building capital ships, he had created swarms of tiny, specialized vessels. Some were purely for reconnaissance, others for hit-and-run attacks, and some seemed to serve no purpose at all. But there was a pattern emerging, one that the simulation's AI couldn't predict because it had never seen anything like it. "They're not fighting a war," head instructor Relix suddenly realized, his gray skin almost black with shock. "They're fighting every war their species has ever fought, all at once." He saw it now. Guerrilla tactics from their ancient forests, naval strategies from their vast oceans, urban warfare techniques from their crowded cities, and space combat theories they'd only dreamed of until now. The simulation's time counter showed 15 minutes of real time had passed. In the simulated galaxy, chaos reigned. But it was controlled chaos, directed chaos. Chaos with a purpose that only the 3 humans seemed to understand. Their smaller allies were prospering, their enemies were stuck in loops of their own rigid thinking, and their ships moved like water through a broken dam. Emma, Marcus, and Jack shared another look. Phase 1 was complete. The galaxy was destabilized, their allies were in position, and their enemies were trapped by their own rules. Now it was time for Phase 2. The watching aliens had thought the first 15 minutes were impossible. They had no idea what was coming next. The simulation's processing core began to heat up. 20 minutes had passed in real time, and the AI was struggling to adapt to strategies it had never encountered in centuries of operation. Warning messages flashed across the control screens as the system tried to predict what the humans would do next. It failed every time. Emma had turned the gravity slingshot technique into an art form. Her ships now danced between stars in complex patterns, using the gravitational fields of multiple celestial bodies to achieve speeds that made the simulation's physics engine stutter. The AI kept marking these movements as errors, but the human ships kept moving, kept striking, kept winning. Marcus watched as his diplomatic web caught bigger and bigger fish. Major powers that had been deadlocked by his earlier moves now faced internal rebellions. Their own colony worlds, tired of waiting for solutions, began breaking away. The simulation tried to calculate the political fallout, but found too many variables. Too many possibilities it had never been programmed to handle. Jack's swarm tactics had evolved into something even more terrifying. His small ships no longer just hit and ran. They worked together in ways that seemed random at first glance, but revealed deadly patterns on closer inspection. They would scatter like startled birds, only to reform at exactly the right moment to tear apart enemy formations that were still following standard combat doctrine. "The simulation is adapting," one of the alien instructors announced, pointing at new data streams. The AI was learning, changing its strategies, trying to mirror the humans' unconventional methods. But there was a problem. It could only copy what it understood, and it understood less than it thought. Emma spotted the simulation's attempts to copy her gravity assist maneuvers. She smiled and changed her tactics instantly, using the AI's own copied moves against it. Where her ships had been dancing through gravity wells, they now used the enemy's predicted responses to create traps, turning their pursuit momentum into deadly collisions with invisible gravity fields. Marcus saw the diplomatic AI trying to create its own version of chaos. Its attempts were clumsy, too logical, too easy to spot. He turned these attempts back on themselves, using the simulation's own diplomatic protocols to create a feedback loop that left entire sectors in political gridlock. The machine tried to be unpredictable, but could only act within its programming. Jack's fleet engaged the newly adapted AI ships in direct combat for the first time. The simulation had copied his swarm tactics, but didn't understand the underlying principles. Its ships moved in perfect formation, trying to be unpredictable through mathematical patterns. Jack's response was to be truly random, to break formation when logic said to hold when logic said to break. "Look at the strategic map," Head Instructor Ralix commanded, his voice tight with disbelief. The humans controlled less than 10% of the galaxy's territory. But those territories were perfectly placed, creating choke points and staging areas that gave them control of nearly half the galaxy's vital supply lines. It wasn't about taking space, it was about controlling movement. The simulation's time counter showed 25 minutes of real time had passed. The AI core's cooling systems were working at maximum capacity as it tried to process the impossible scenarios the humans kept creating. But the three cadets weren't finished. They had pushed the simulation to its limits, and now they were ready to break it completely. 30 minutes into the simulation, Emma made her boldest move yet. She had found a way to create artificial gravity wells by positioning multiple ships in precise formations. The simulation's physics engine couldn't handle these impossible configurations. Space itself seemed to bend around her fleet, creating shortcuts through the galaxy that shouldn't exist. Marcus watched as his diplomatic web reached its breaking point. The smaller powers he had allied with were now positioned perfectly, their combined economic influence greater than the sum of their parts. The larger powers, still trapped in his earlier deadlock, found their own populations demanding change. The simulation tried to calculate stability factors and failed repeatedly. Jack's military strategy had evolved beyond anything the galaxy had seen. His ships no longer fought like ships at all. They fought like a force of nature. They appeared from impossible angles, struck without warning, and vanished into Emma's artificial gravity wells. The simulation's combat AI kept trying to predict their movements and failing, its processing core struggling with the endless calculations. The watching aliens had fallen completely silent. They watched as centuries of military doctrine crumbled before their eyes. The humans weren't just winning. They were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. Even Head Instructor Ralix stood motionless, his gray skin almost transparent with shock. Emma's next move threatened to break the simulation entirely. She had created a network of artificial gravity wells that formed a new type of faster-than-light travel. Her ships could now cross the galaxy in seconds by riding these waves of bent space. The simulation's physics engine began to show signs of complete failure as it tried to process these movements. Marcus triggered the final phase of his diplomatic assault. Every trade agreement, every alliance, every political move he had made suddenly connected. The smaller powers rose up together, their combined strength multiplied by perfect positioning and timing. The larger powers, still paralyzed by his earlier moves, could only watch as their influence crumbled. Jack launched what looked like a suicidal charge straight at the heart of the largest enemy fleet. But his ships weren't aiming for the enemy at all. They were using the enemy's own formation as a gravity anchor point. The massive fleet found itself caught in one of Emma's artificial gravity wells, their own mass turned against them. The simulation's core temperature is critical, an alien technician announced, panic in their voice. The system had never faced this kind of stress before. It wasn't just processing impossible moves, it was trying to understand strategies that broke its fundamental assumptions about how war worked. 35 minutes had passed in real time. In the simulated galaxy, Emma's gravity network had turned normal space travel into a joke. Marcus's diplomatic web had rewritten the political landscape. Jack's military strategies had rendered traditional fleet tactics obsolete. The simulation was fighting against itself, trying to adapt to changes it couldn't understand. The three humans shared another look. Their plan had worked perfectly. The simulation wasn't just losing. It was being forced to evolve, to think in new ways, to break free from its own limitations. Just as humanity had done throughout its history on Earth, they had turned impossible odds into inevitable victory. 40 minutes into the simulation, the humans launched their endgame. Emma's gravity manipulation had reached its peak, creating a web of artificial corridors through space that only her ships could navigate. The simulation's physics engine was now running at maximum capacity, desperately trying to process movements it had been programmed to consider impossible. Marcus unleashed his final diplomatic strike. Every smaller power under his influence moved at once, their combined economic and political might crashing through the galaxy like a tidal wave. The larger powers, still trapped in his web of regulations and treaties, found themselves surrounded by former vassals who had grown strong under human guidance. Jack's fleet split into 3 parts, each one moving with impossible precision through Emma's gravity corridors. The simulation's combat AG tried to track them but failed, its tactical algorithms crashing as they attempted to predict the unpredictable. The humans weren't following any known doctrine. They were creating new ones with every move. The core is reaching critical temperatures, the technician warned, but no one moved to stop the simulation. They couldn't look away from what was happening. The 3 human cadets had turned warfare into an art form, blending physics, politics, and combat into something entirely new. Emma's ships emerged from their gravity corridors directly inside enemy formations. The simulation marked these positions as impossible, but the ships were there anyway, turning the enemy's own mass and momentum into weapons against them. Entire fleets found themselves torn apart by forces they couldn't understand or resist. Marcus watched as his diplomatic endgame played out. The smaller powers weren't just rising up. They were offering the larger powers a chance to join them, to be part of something new. It was a strategy pulled straight from Earth's history, victory not through destruction, but through transformation. The simulation's political AI crashed trying to calculate the implications. Jack's 3-pronged attack reached their targets simultaneously. Each fleet struck at a vital point that Emma's gravity manipulation had exposed and Marcus's diplomatic work had left undefended. The simulation tried to respond, but found itself trapped by its own rules, its own assumptions about how war should work. The vast hall was completely silent except for the hum of overworked cooling systems. The alien instructors and students watched as their understanding of military strategy was completely rewritten. The humans hadn't just beaten the simulation. They had forced it to evolve, to think in new ways, to break free from its own limitations. 45 minutes had passed in real time. In the simulated galaxy, the last remnants of resistance were crumbling. Not through overwhelming force, but through a combination of innovative physics, adaptive diplomacy, and fluid military tactics that the simulation had never been programmed to handle. At exactly 58 minutes, the simulation ended. The display showed total victory, not through brute force or overwhelming numbers, but through a perfect storm of innovative tactics that had rewritten the rules of galactic warfare. The three human cadets sat back from their terminals, their faces calm despite what they had just accomplished. The cooling systems finally stopped their desperate whine as the simulation's processors returned to normal temperatures. In the vast hall of the Galactic Military Academy, no one spoke. The alien instructors and students stared at the final statistics displayed on the massive screens above. 10 years of simulated warfare, compressed into less than an hour of real time. Head instructor Ralix moved forward, his gray skin shifting through colors as he struggled to process what he had witnessed. The human stood at attention, awaiting his assessment. The data didn't lie. They hadn't just beaten the simulation. They had broken it, rebuilt it, and turned it into something entirely new. Emma's gravity manipulation techniques had changed their understanding of space warfare forever. Her strategies proved that the galaxy's established laws of physics weren't limits. They were tools, waiting to be used in ways no one had imagined. The Academy's physics department was already downloading her data, preparing to rewrite their textbooks. Marcus's diplomatic victory showed them that true power wasn't about size or strength. He had turned the galaxy's rigid political structure against itself, using rules and regulations like weapons. The smaller powers he had united weren't just victorious. They were stronger together than the old empires had ever been. The political science instructors were already arguing about the implications. Jack's military innovations had rendered centuries of tactical doctrine obsolete. His adaptive strategies, combined with Emma's physics breakthroughs and Marcus's diplomatic web, had created a new form of warfare. The military instructors watched the replay of his campaigns in stunned silence, seeing their life's work transformed before their eyes. 58 minutes, Rylix finally said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. You did in 58 minutes what our best strategists couldn't do in 10 years. He looked at the three humans, seeing them differently now. We called you Deathworlders because of your physical capabilities. We never understood that wasn't what made you dangerous. The other aliens began to understand too. Humans weren't just strong because they came from a high-gravity world. They were dangerous because their harsh world had taught them to adapt, to think differently, to turn disadvantages into strengths. Every challenge on Earth had forced them to innovate, to break rules, to find new ways to survive and thrive. The simulation will need to be redesigned, Rylix announced, and the Academy's curriculum will need to change. He straightened to his full height. You haven't just passed the test. You've shown us that everything we thought we knew about warfare, about physics, about diplomacy, everything needs to be reconsidered. The three human cadets remained at attention, but small smiles played at their lips. They had done more than prove themselves. They had shown the galaxy why humanity had survived its harsh homeworld. It wasn't just physical strength or endurance. It was their ability to think differently, to adapt, to turn the impossible into the inevitable. The Academy would never be the same, and neither would the galaxy.